So my name's Theo. I'm a systems engineer here at Eventbrite. We work with Jenkins and Selenium. I've been here 2 years, and I've actually worked with both of them even before that. Both of these services or this open source projects have saved so much of my time that we're really excited to be able to host this. Sauce Labs and CloudBee both are sponsors here, so give them a quick round of applause. Oh yeah, and also Eventbrite. So one of the things that we wanted to do was get together and show you about how we're utilizing these things. A lot of this is showing Jenkins, because this has been a big groundbreaking part for us, more so than Selenium, because Selenium has just worked for years. It's mostly a plug and play for us that's worked really well. So another introduction?
Yeah, I'm John. I'm also a systems engineer with Theo on the same team. Like you said, I've also used Jenkins at a previous employer, and I love it. This job is my first experience with Selenium, so I've been learning a lot there. And you know, Theo and I are not the only ones that do all the Jenkins and Selenium stuff here, and it wouldn't be possible without the help of other awesome members of our team, like Brian and Allison and all these other people. So we may not be able to answer all your questions, but we'll try.
But we have enough people here to answer them. So yeah, they're all actually in the back over there. So give them a round of applause. So yeah, Eventbrite. Who are we? Is anyone here familiar with Eventbrite? Maybe slightly. Everyone should be raising their hand because you bought your ticket from us. So yeah, so who is Eventbrite? We're a company that sells tickets, and we sell a lot of tickets. Last night when I put these slides, or we put these slides together, we sold 52,611,655 tickets. And it's probably gone up another bunch since last night. So we sold a lot of tickets, and we have 190 employees. About 50 of them are engineers in the QA engineering, just engineering actually. We have international customers, and then we're also in 7 different languages. And we want to expand farther than that. So one of the things that has really helped us to be able to do something with the resources that we have is automation. And how can we get this stuff out and tested before it gets to the people? So in case you're wondering, the way we're doing this is I go, and then if he's got a comment, he goes next. So I think I said enough there. Our release cycle. This is a very important thing, as most of you know. Does anyone here actually do releases for their companies or a part of that? Are you guys, I'm guessing you guys are all using Selenium and Jenkins, or part of your release process? Well, one of the things we want to go over is how we're actually doing our deployment. But a release cycle. So we do weekly releases. This is a weekly release is features. What's new? What's going out? What do we want people to see? And what's new about us? And then, of course, we have daily releases. This is bug fixes, because anytime you do code, there's no way you're going to actually do it perfect. And you can't really test it unless you, I mean, I've never been anywhere that can test it 100% and look at every edge case to find where issues are. Using load testing, using not just Selenium and custom scripts. The only real way to actually find out whether or not there's a bug is to get into production, which kind of sucks. But the fact of the matter is, that's the way it works.
Yeah, I'm not sure what to say about the release cycle. Yeah, we'd like to release faster. How many of you guys release like multiple times a day? All right, there you go. Yes, we're going to get there.
So the flow. So the way that we have this, the basic way that our developers, the majority of our code is in Python. So I'm using that example here. Basically, our developers program in Python. We use a Git repo that everyone checks into, and then we have branches off of that. Jenkins pulls that down, and then from there it does unit tests, Selenium tests, which is basically our smoke tests. That ends up going up to Sauce Labs to do all our Selenium tests, and then gives us the visuals on it. And then there's the cycle. So if you look at this, basically what happens, it gets down to Jenkins. This would be one of our builds. It would go up to the unit test, go over to Selenium, then get back to Jenkins, and then from there, whether or not it passed this, it could actually go to dev. So the dev can actually like keep pushing and do the circle. After we think that dev is good enough, and we're ready to actually push into QA for our QA team to come up with their test, and also figure out whether or not it's to be promoted, cycle happens again, and so on and so forth from staging to production. And then we got the end user.
Theo makes great flowcharts.
It's a new software I've been playing with. I really was impressed by the stick figures. I actually wanted to bring more stick figures in for the users, because I don't think there's just one person buying those 50 million tickets. But I could be wrong.
Yeah, I think what that picture illustrates is that Jenkins is like our central source of truth for build information and test results and smoke test results and anything related to do with getting out a new release. We refer to Jenkins for that.
What do our builds contain? Our builds, the way that we have this set up is we basically ship out, we have a virtual environment for Python, and then there's also a distinct naming convention. We find this very important for when things are going out to figure out which version is on what system. The number in the middle, so we have the Eventbrite build. It comes from the branch of master, I'm sorry, going out of order. It's an Eventbrite build. It's 750 is actually the Jenkins number that's been assigned to it. It's built off the master branch, and then it's a SHA. It's a part of Git to figure out the custom name that it's not human readable, but the computer's not going to mess it up.
Yeah, we definitely we build a bunch of different products here. The big one being our core website, which we're going to dive into detail here. And so for all the products we build, they're all Python-based. We're using virtualenv, this Python technology, for all of them. And we had to hack on virtualenv a little bit to get it to actually work outside of your own directory, but it was a super tiny patch. We'd be happy to share it with you. So yeah, the key point is we use pip to install our requirements. So a typical build process, create a virtual environment, use pip to install your requirements, and at the end of doing your build, you tar it all up, and you end up with this reproducible, self-contained blob that can be taken to different stages of the process to be tested and finally deployed.
Basic technologies that we're using, and this actually, we should have extended this, but we're using Python, Scones, Django, MySQL, RabbitMQ, Hadoop, Nginx, Mongo, CSS, PHP, run through even more. So yeah, so we've got a lot of servers, and yeah, managing's fun.
Yeah, I mean, we're doing a lot of stuff here. In addition to just like selling tickets on the web, we're also take into account if you tell us what your preferences are, then we're doing, analytics and recommendations that try to figure out what other events could we email you about and so forth and so on. So yeah, that's where all these sort of technologies intermingle. If you're not familiar with scones or scones, as we like to call it, it's a Python-based make tool. It's pretty much just like make, except it's written in Python and has some pretty cool features. We use that for all of our builds.
How we build, test, and deploy. So I was going to do a cool flow chart for this, but the fact of the matter is you already saw that other flow chart, and this kind of goes over that again. The general flow is the EB core build, EB core, and then it goes into test. Then it does a smoke test, and then it's QA deploy. And then if QA actually agrees with it, then it gets promoted. We do our deployments using Fabric. Fabric uses parallel, so if you've ever used like DSH, you can basically get it out to all the servers all at once. We have our server, which we call IMAN, which is our central source of truth. And that actually pulls all the information on where it's actually going to go to. A typical release will hit 50 servers at a time, roughly. Yeah. And then, yeah, so our Fabric script basically pushes everything out, does a restart. And this is also good for rollbacks because it sets up a symlink. And then Jenkins, as we went over with the naming convention, does our fingerprinting. And it's also a server for pulling the information. One of the things that we had a lot of problems with in the past was the way that we were doing our builds, because they were getting so complicated that certain parts were coming down at different times. So if I was pushing out a dev release and I pulled my pip repo from pi.com, or if I pulled it from someplace else, or I built it locally, that might actually have different characteristics as in when I pushed to QA. So there was ways that we had this problem where things that were getting out in dev, QA, and staging were actually different versions. So the way we got around that was actually having Jenkins being the central source of truth. Having that build the one repo, or build the one release, and then from there we were able to push it out to everything. We were guaranteed that there was no discrepancies.
All right. I'll go into some detail here. I know this is a pretty big slide. So yeah, like Theo said, we have 3 main jobs in Jenkins that are responsible for handling our main site code. I guess 4. So the build job, the test job, the smoke test job, and the deploy job. I'm just going to go into a little bit of detail about each one of those. I can't see my notes here, but so with the build job, like I said, We're using Git, so we're pulling Git every 2 minutes. Kosuke, I'm not sure where he went, but a couple of months ago had a great blog post about using GitHub post-receive hooks, and instead of polling GitHub every 2 minutes, you can have GitHub push to you whenever something has changed. So that's something cool that we could all work on as a community to write some common infrastructure for. We're going to try and get that going here. Like I said, we're using SCONs to do the build. And so, I mean, the typical build process is like, oh yeah, check out the code and maybe like put the assets in the right directory, pre-compile all the JSS and CSS to make sure there's no syntax errors, same with the Python, pretty much tar it up. During the build process, yeah, we do all that, we tar it up, and at the end of the build process, we're doing a couple of unique things that actually tie back into Jenkins that I wanted to mention. One of them is release notes. So we use the promotion process in Jenkins to promote builds to production. So whenever we do a new build, we have this release note script that runs at the end of the build, and it says, okay, show me a diff of all the changes from the last release build to production to this build. And it generates, yeah, I don't know why. You do it too, yeah. So we generate that big diff of all the changes since the last release. We make this pretty HTML file that says, oh, settings changes in this release. Oh, database changes in this release. And it's something that Theo and I on our team can look at and go, oh, okay, that's exactly what we have to deal with in this release. SQL this, blah, blah, blah. Another thing is we just got certified for PCI compliance, for handling people's credit cards and stuff. And part of the requirements there are that we actively monitor source code files related to credit card handling. And that's boring as hell. What does that mean? I don't know that hand signal, but yeah, exactly. It's a big pain in the ass is what it is. And so actually we use Review Board here. I don't know if you guys have seen that. It's another open source Python thing. It was written by the kind folks at VMware, and it allows our developers to post their diffs to this fancy GUI and let other developers come in and code review and say ship it. So during our build process, after the release notes, we run a PCI compliance watcher script, which looks at a config file for the list of the files that are important. And it goes, oh, this file changed in the release. And it posts a review to Review Board to all the managers and says, hey, somebody's changing a credit card file. So those are a couple of unique things about our build process. Next is the EB Core test process. And so if the build, all that stuff passes, exit 0 at the end, we send it on to the EB Core test process. And as the slide mentioned, we're using fingerprinting of artifacts and just kicking off a downstream job. We're using the parameterized build trigger to do this. So when we launch the test job, what we're doing is we download that build tarball artifact from Jenkins, untar it, enter that virtual environment, and run nose, which is to run our unit test. Where's Brian? Did I say the right thing? Yes. Okay, good. Brian did a lot of that. So if the test job passes, then we trigger the next job in the process, which is the smoke test job. So far tonight, we've talked a lot about Selenium, and the CTO of Sauce Labs just got up, and so we're definitely using Selenium, but right now we're using Sauce Labs, which is Selenium as a service. So Brian and his team write all the tests in Selenium and WebDriver, and I'm still not sure I entirely understand. This is pretty tricky. But basically, Sauce Labs offers a proxy that we run on our instance, right? And so when we want to run our smoke tests, we go to that proxy and say, hey, tell Sauce Labs to run all these tests from our test files and run these browsers. And the proxy goes out to Sauce Labs in their cloud, and Sauce Labs machines comes back to our machines and does all the testing. So we don't have to open up our QA site to the internet, and we get a bunch of multiple browser testing, all using Selenium, and it's pretty darn cool.
So EB Core smoke test. So this is actually one of the graphs that shows where there was errors. I had to dig really, really deep into the Jenkins tests to find this one, because usually we don't have any errors. So this was hours of work. Marvel at it. That's enough.
Yeah, Jenkins is just awesome for the graphing and the reporting. And so that brings us to failure cases, right? It's like, what happens when builds fail? We're not doing anything like earth-shattering with Jenkins, in my personal opinion, but just being able to use it as a solid place to do things in a repeatable fashion, right? Like failure cases. When the builds fail or the tests fail or the smoke tests fail, we email the entire team. And I wrote this here, the public embarrassment does work. We have a great small team that likes each other, and nobody likes to be spammed with a bunch of emails. So even if nobody will step up and say, I broke that, which they usually do, after a while of being emailed every 15 minutes that the shit's broken, somebody goes, oh, I can't take it anymore, fix the damn tests, and we're on our way again. So. Yeah, just trying to mention the different Jenkins things we use. We use the editable email plugin to do the customization of the build emails to include, the output of the tests and so forth and so on. One piece of feedback for like the Sauce Lab Selenium guys is I still can't figure out how to read a Selenium test output to save my life. You know? I'm learning though. I'm learning. With Sauce Labs though, it doesn't really matter because you see the Selenium output, but then there's like a link to a video, and it makes it all, you know, something that an ops guy can do.
Even me. The promotion process. So basically what we actually have is gold stars, which is pretty sweet. So we promote the stage and then promote the release to production.
Yeah, I think the promotion plugin's pretty cool. It's pretty complicated, you know, trying to recreate an entire Jenkins job within a little promotion window. I know Kosuke knows what I'm talking about. But yeah, back in our build job, if everything is passed all the tests, the promotion process automatically gives the build a green star. And if QA decides that they want to actually test that build seriously as a release candidate, they can promote it to staging by clicking, you know, promote to staging. That gives it a blue star. And if they decide it's production ready, they'll click promote to production. That gives it a gold star and sends us an email in the ops team that it's time to deploy it. And it, you know, pre-fills out this nice email with like, oh yeah, it passed all the PCI checks. Lie, 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 lie. Yeah. Just kidding, but yeah, so there's this big email that we have to, you know, we used to just say it's time for release, but with PCI you have to write like 8 pages about, you know.
Yeah. With also a release process, we've locked it down to where we've built the Jenkins tool in such a way that anybody who has access to the Jenkins web interface can push out to any of our dev QA servers and also staging. But then after that, it actually gets in the hands of operations. And we're the only ones that have access to the production servers. And then from there, we actually use the same build, but it goes out that way.
Yeah, so QA uses the same tools that Ops uses to deploy the builds to the QA site that we use to deploy to the production site. QA, I've set that job up in Jenkins so they can click deploy my build to whatever QA environment. And then the way that we test our deployment scripts is by having them do that.
And I don't know, if everyone does that here, then you guys were a bit before us. But having actually each group do the exact same steps is hands down the best way of doing something. This way everybody knows exactly where everyone else is at, and they can also find errors or better ways of doing things. We've got a team doing the exact same thing. Instead of a term that we use a lot in this industry is throwing something over the fence. And if you have QA that does their own custom scripts, and you've got ops doing their own custom scripts, and you've got management doing blah, 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 or whatever, they don't really do anything, but but you don't throw things over the fence. And I found that having this sort of a structure has really helped us as teams or as people.
So, I mean, if you're a developer, you've got a QA team that's checking your work. But if you're an ops and you're writing code like that's going to deploy to the site, QA's not really going to test that unless you have something cool like Jenkins to help you. Damn. Damn it, I jumped ahead again.
That's okay. So this is the slide about what he already talked about.
I get excited.
This is a very exciting topic. Right? I'm excited.
Yeah.
Where are we at? Oh, so builds, getting promoted. So basically passing unit test. That's obviously the easiest way. If you can set your code up where basically you say, hey, can you run? And it says no. It didn't pass. It's so easy. Second one, obviously, the smoke test. That's us using Selenium to throw as much as you can at the code. We deploy in staging. QA. You guys are interested in this. So basically our development area is built for the developers to go on there. They have sudo on there. QA is only for our QA staff to have sudo on. Ideally, they don't go in there and change things around too much. We want them to understand and know exactly what they're doing. Stage is basically exactly the same as production, except it doesn't have production data or people aren't using it. Then we deploy to staging. That's where our real test happens, where we can actually see what's going on. If something's actually going to break in prod, it's going to break here right away. And then it gets a gold star. And who doesn't like a gold star?
Yeah. One of the things Theo invented with this whole release process is that when QA wants to send a new build to production, they have to pick a song, and that we also have to play that song on all the TVs during the release. Keeps it fun, you know, that's a key part of this whole thing, is keeping it fun for everybody. And Jenkins really helps to do that. You give them the stars, and you're like, oh, does it have the green star now? And like, it's super fun, right?
I play in bands, and many of our releases have been my own band. So it's really just self-promotion. I'm cool with that. Important job. So we have well, actually, you should go on this one.
Yeah, so the stuff we talked about, the build, the test, the smoke test, that happens every time you check into Git. We're checking for changes in Git every 2 minutes, and if they happen in Git, we'll pull it down, build it, test it, and smoke test it. QA can optionally deploy it. Along with that, we have these other jobs that are very important to the operation of our website and development process. One of them being the full suite, which is like a hour-long Selenium test. So that runs hourly, in addition to the fact that it takes about 55 minutes. Maybe I'm lying, I forget. But basically, we run that hourly on the latest passing master build, and then that kicks off as a downstream job, the browser job, which does various browser testing for aspects, and then a performance job, which uses JMeter. Another important one, right, is the cut RC job. We cut our RC branches on Monday mornings and release those on Wednesdays. So hey, you can use Jenkins to do anything. When I talk to side note here, if I talk to people who don't understand Jenkins, I'm like, hey, it's like cron, except it has a GUI, and it's fun, and it's awesome. So, typical jobs that might have been manual at other companies or a year ago here, we just put it in Jenkins. It's really cool. Last one would be the EB Core VM data. Getting IMs here, sorry. So we're using Vagrant. I don't know, how many people know Vagrant? Shameless plug for Vagrant. All right, cool. We just had Mitchell Hashimoto in here a couple of weeks ago talking about Vagrant. It's very cool. And it allows developers, it allows ops to create a development image that's just like production using the same Puppet server or Chef server if you use Chef. So we made that, distributed all developers. Developers basically have an entire production web server clone on their laptop that's just for them. And so they can test in a very production-like environment. It has Nginx, it has uWhiskey, it has Mongo, it has whatever, and this and that and the other. So what EB Core VM data job does is kind of queries a bunch of a minimal data set out of the production database and then munges it to change email addresses and passwords to test stuff, and then generates a big YAML file, and then when you run Vagrant up to bring up your developer environment, it actually fetches that from Jenkins and populates your database with it. So it's a wicked cycle, and it's fun.
Do you guys have any questions, by the way? We've only got a couple more slides, but I should have said this at the beginning. If you have questions, you can just yell them out. What's that? How do we migrate our database? That's a really, really good question. Wait, you're saying actually from production to dev? So that actually would just save a schema. So we have a test amount of data that we've created for the developers, and then what we do is every single time that we do a change in the database, we keep a snapshot of the schema, and that's a part of our build. It doesn't go out to the servers because there's really no need for that, and that's actually pulled out via scones. But and then when people are developing, this is kind of a touchy area because something we really need to work on. And I think a lot of people may have it, unless you're a DBA. And if you're a DBA, I want to talk to you later. Yeah, so what we do is we actually have some automated scripts. They're basically .SQL files for anything that's new for development. So a developer can go in there and say, I've got this idea for a table or an appendage to a column. And so say there's 20 scripts in there at a time. Those 20 scripts, maybe only one will get run for that week, but those can all run on your development environment. And usually the way that we actually code, changes to the database aren't giant. It's not like drop this table and make a whole new one. It's usually either just adding a column or creating a complete new table from nowhere. And that's worked quite well for us. So the question was, how does that actually follow all the way through? One of the things that we do every week, everyone starts with a whole new database that's a copy of production, and everything gets brought back in there at every single stage. So Monday morning, whatever we're going to do, and our releases are on Wednesday. So every Monday morning, what needs to be done will be done to all the different environments. So, and like I said, we don't drop, or we haven't done big migrations like that. We've kind of been building on the same data set or the same schema as what we've had in the past.
But those are done in your build process, or is that just separate?
We're doing them separately and manually. Like in production, we definitely do schema changes manually. In staging, that's a place for Theo and I and ops to test those manual schema updates and time them and get a feel. Like we might actually have Noah, our load test expert, run some load tests against stage while we do the schema updates to simulate how is this going to handle while it's under load. And then for QA, we let QA apply their own migrations. And they're sort of like, we're letting them do that so that they can see them and then report to us via an admin tool that we've written that things are cool. Short word.
Yeah, and then in the
But it's all still manual, and we'd like to get to an automated thing. And that's actually a Q2 goal for our team, is to try to get to automatic schema management.
We've got cool ideas. But it is also automated for the Vagrant, where if someone actually checks it into our Git repository, you can actually like build your database and everything will be done for you.
Yeah, totally automated for dev.
And smoke tests, it's also automated there. So we have some automation, but of course with databases, there's only so much you really want to automate. And everyone says automate, 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 but yeah, I don't want something weird happening. What do you got? Well, with our schema changes, like we haven't done big schema changes. Like that would actually be something that for our Q2 goals that we haven't done like a Eventbrite 2.0, where the entire thing's been revamped, and that's actually an issue with our database. As of right now, what happens on a weekly basis is people have features. If you have a feature, that's actually one part of the database, which would be columns, maybe an extra table. For us, it'd be users, maybe. It basically comes down to tools. So rollback procedure for us would be an alter. So it's not something that right now we have to worry about, and everybody knows not to do something like that. But if we were to do something where it would be like a 2.0 where it's a completely new schema, then we'd actually have a plan and a rollback. And in my mind, it would actually be a whole new database. We have downtime, move everything over. But everyone's got their own theories behind that. We've been doing a lot of research as far as how to manage that. And we've all come up with a bunch of different ideas. And the way, we're kind of like locked into the way that we're coding, we've looked at a lot of different options. In fact, if anyone's a DBA, we are hiring a DBA. Yeah. So I've got business cards. If you're actually looking for any work, just come talk to me. But you want to...
Yeah, I mean, we've looked at a couple of migration tools, and it's like Theo said, it's like they do things really well. I use them for some of our smaller projects here, which we didn't actually talk about yet, but for the big core site, like we've got some history here, and we like to do things a certain way, and no tool that we've looked at so far seems to do things exactly in the way we'd like, so I think we're going to end up taking sort of best-of-breed ideas from those tools and rolling our own. And to answer your question, all the schema changes we do are done in a way that are not going to like hurt the site. So let's say this week's release is going to start using a new table called foo. Well, before the release, we're going to create that table called foo in production, and then we're going to deploy the release. And if the release goes horribly wrong and we have to roll back, well, the table foo is not going to matter. Is that? Yeah. Yeah. Technically, our Jenkins boxes are in our production environment because I felt that they needed to be treated as serious. Let me know if they're down. I want them to be up. I want them to have support, sort of thing. But when they run the EB Core performance job, they go over to a QA web server and run it against that. So the worker machine itself is technically a production box running JMeter when it does that, but it's testing against QA.
How do we manage branching and workflow in Git?
Yeah, that's a good question. We have two slides at the end. One is sort of like gotchas and issues, and I was going to mention some of that. So we basically work on master the whole time. All the developers work on master the whole time. We cut an RC branch on Mondays, and QA starts testing that. And for any minor fixes that branch needs, developers will check that fix into both master and RC. And so you're right, when the build job is polling Git every 2 minutes, it's always polling master. It's only polling one branch. So if somebody comes in and clicks build the RC branch, then Jenkins is going to start polling the RC branch, and master's not going to get built. And that's actually an open issue in Jenkins right now that, when that happens, I have to go click manually build master, so we'll start following master again. But, we're kind of lucky in the fact that we're only dealing with 2 branches. At my previous employer, we had 9 or 10 active branches at any time, so I'm in heaven right now. The question is whether we have any tools built into our build process for debugging performance issues and profiling. Yes, actually, as of our last hackathon, one of our engineers just wrote a tool. I can't think of the funny name. Everything has a funny name. But basically, if you're in our dev or QA site, you can go to a special page and you can see all the requests that just came in the last 5 minutes. Click on that request and see a heat map flowchart thing. It's pretty cool. It shows the call trace diagram and then heat maps how long each one took. So yeah, we just got that recently. We're pretty excited. Actually, we do. The repeat the question is, do we use Jenkins to unit test any of our iPhone and Android apps? And to be honest, I hadn't even thought about this when we prepared for this presentation, but we currently let our mobile team run their own copy of Jenkins. our mobile dev team. And so yes, they do, they use Jenkins for builds and tests. And I'm sorry, I don't have any of the details, but they seem happy. He's asking if we use Selenium to do any sort of interaction simulation, but I'm not sure. But we could put you in touch with the right guy.
Or girl, or woman. She's here in the back. We'll do an introduction after we're done with our presentation. So we're going to go back to the slides, and then we'll answer more questions. Yeah. So other products that we've been using. Sorry, I'm going to steal this for a second. Other products. So we started off with using it as core, and this has saved us so much time as far as our testing, getting the integration. So what we call core is basically our web servers and our core product. And now we're doing data analytics, EB analytics, NIBI, and Sentry. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Sentry. We're also using that. Jenkins has a build for it, so now we have that managed. So we're kind of trying to offload as much as possible. There's a few other products that we have are still manual tasks. And getting into here, for instance, today I did a release that used to take an entire day because you had to actually go through and figure out exactly what they're changing. Some things can't change, some things need to change. It's not simple. But if you actually logically figure out what can't and get it moved out, today's release took 5 minutes and it used to take me like 2 hours. That made me very happy.
Yeah, so the general idea is that we use the same processes and mentalities for all the other products. Like with the main side, like we talked about, we have the EB Core build, EB Core test, EB Core deploy. Same thing with these jobs, database analytics, NIBI, and Sentry. We use the same framework, we use the same fabric script, we keep things simple, we keep things repeatable. Going back to your question about the multiple branches, doesn't really matter how many branches we have because each build is completely self-contained, right? Like build whatever branch you want, we'll give you a self-contained tarball, and you can untar that and enter the virtual environment and use that build. All right, I wasn't really sure what to talk about here. Just wanted to mention a couple of things. If you guys are sort of like new to Jenkins, you might appreciate these things. Jenkins does a great job of keeping control and managing the workers that you say to Jenkins, this is a Jenkins worker. But if you write a job that runs on a Jenkins worker and that job goes out to your web server and does stuff, that's cool. But then if you write some other job that also runs on Jenkins and goes out to that web server, there's no actual locking there. Unless you get fancy and use the locks and latches plugin. Probably some other plugins to accomplish that. So just something to watch out for is like locking on resources that Jenkins doesn't actually know you're using. So if you start using hosts down in your shell scripts and Jenkins doesn't know about them, you could easily have two jobs hitting the same thing, causing each other to fail. So be careful when you're doing that with concurrent execution. Another thing is like, one thing I've learned over the years is, it's really cool. You go to define a new job in Jenkins, and there's the, execute shell text box, and you start typing in your shell script. That's super cool, and I always use that to get me off the ground. But what I've learned over the years is that I need that logic to revision with the code. So if the build logic says, oh, move this to that, and copy this to that, and name this that, well, that's great for now, but as soon as the developers rename their tree, or reorganize their tree, all that breaks. And so what we do is we defined a script in each tree called Jenkins build.sh and Jenkins test.sh. And the only thing our execute shell in Jenkins does is Jenkins build.sh. And so no matter what branch you're building and no matter how things change, Jenkins just calls the script, and then the script within that branch will have the corresponding appropriate logic. Probably should have ended up on this, but yeah, I love Jenkins, don't get me wrong. I was just going to, since I'm here with fellow peeps, I was going to mention some of the things we've run into. Since we're doing the Git polling right now, like I just mentioned, like you're polling master, you're polling master, you're polling master, you're not looking at RC. And so somebody builds RC, you're polling RC, you're polling RC, you're not looking at master. So if you want to build master again, you got to go tell it to build master so it'll poll master. I filed a bug about this, but I think the real answer is switching to the push method rather than the pull method. Another thing is like, if you, in your unit test job, you say, send an email to the team when unit tests fail. That's cool, I like that, except for this scenario. You build and test master and unit tests fail. You send an email to the team. The next build is a build of RC, which is stable, and unit tests pass. And it sends an email to the team and says, oh, unit tests are fixed. But really they're not, it's just that we just tested a different branch. And then you run master again, it fails again. So I actually had to disable the unit test failure emails to stop that flip-flop. That's definitely an option, but then what if I add a third branch? I have to add a third Jenkins job? That's not going to scale. I mean, in my opinion, right? Like, I don't want to get into. I like my UI to be nice and clean. I've got to teach new QA folks how to deal with it. I don't want to, you know, oh, you added a new branch. Well, go to find a new Jenkins job. I definitely hear you, but just yeah, trying to solve that as simply as possible is challenging. And the last thing is like we're using archive the artifacts and fingerprint the artifacts, and that's really cool. It seems really slow though, so keep your build sizes small is my advice there. Make sure your developers are not checking in, you know, large unnecessary jar files into your Python tree, as an example.
That's really all we got. Now it's for real questions. Do you guys have any other questions?
All the promotions are done manually. So the builds are done automatically, the testing is done automatically, and it's when QA wants to take a build under serious consideration that they promote it to stage. And once they've seriously considered it on stage, they can manually promote it for release to production, which emails us.
So what does that promotion, that manual promotion look like? Is that just from Fabric?
They actually go to the build job and click promote this build to staging. Now the promotion, the green star that indicates unit test passed is automatic. And the next step, which is promoting to staging, requires that previous test passing. So QA is not allowed to promote a build to staging unless it passed all its tests.
Deal with concurrent testing in multiple browsers. That's the Sauce Labs secret, which if you can actually ask Brian, Allison over there afterwards. Yeah, they write a bunch of cool Selenium tests. And
I think that's where Sauce Labs comes in, right? It's like you say, hey, Sauce Labs, go run these 5 tests against these 8 browsers, and it goes blam. It's all magic and awesome to me. So, no, that's a good point. Mobile changes that depend on server changes. That's a really good question. I'm not sure how we're coordinating that. Like I said, the mobile team is using their own Jenkins at the moment. So it's just a matter of human interaction, I think, at the current time.
yeah, they've actually got a harder point because they've got 2 parts that they're working on. Usually, well, and I wouldn't say that they're isolated, but a lot of times the device people have their heads down working on the device and not the back end per se. We could actually change a lot of things, but it really just comes down to communication. So when a release goes out, they usually test directly against master. So we have a master, then we have RC branches. In fact, we have what we call feature branches. So there's like nine different branches that everyone's testing on during the week.
9 environments there.
Yeah, 9. Yeah.
We have 9 QA environments, and actually, so Michelle on the API team will, you know, in order to give the mobile team a stable place to test with, she'll dedicate one of our 9 QA environments. We call it, you know, feature API. We'll put a certain build on there and let the mobile team test against that. I think would be inaccurate.
And that's something that doesn't change as much usually, but they get to control it. Looks like there's no more questions. Again, I want to thank everyone for coming out. Yeah, there's a lot of beer left. You guys can stick around for a bit, but in about, yeah, that's about it. But yeah, I want to thank everyone for speaking. Again, thank our sponsors, CloudBee and Sauce Labs, Eventbrite for hosting, and yeah, and thank you